The vast expanse of space stretched endlessly, silent and cold, as a fleet of alien warships appeared on the outskirts of the Milky Way. The ships were sleek, metallic, and menacing, gliding through the cosmic void with ease. Their design was unlike anything humanity had ever seen. They were advanced, powerful, and seemed ready for war. The aliens had come, and they weren't here to explore. They were here to conquer. Commander Xaler stood at the helm of the largest ship, his hands resting on the controls. His species, the Gyra, had traveled across the galaxy, crushing countless civilizations along the way. They were feared by all, known for their ruthless efficiency and superior technology. Xaler had led them to many victories, but today, something felt different. He had studied Earth from afar. The planet was a small, insignificant world in the outer rim of the galaxy. It was inhabited by humans, a race that had only recently begun to venture into space. Xaler didn't see them as much of a threat. They were primitive, lacking advanced technology and the will to fight. The Gyra had already conquered worlds with far more advanced species. Earth should have been easy. As the fleet approached the planet, Xaler's mind remained focused. This was supposed to be another victory. He had no reason to doubt that it would be anything but something about the way Earth felt. It was almost as if the planet were hiding something that couldn't be seen with the naked eye. It gave him an eerie feeling, but he quickly shook it off. His mission was simple: land, establish control, and secure the planet for the Gyra. As the fleet entered Earth's atmosphere, Xaler ordered his ships to descend toward the surface. They landed in a vast, remote area far from the planet's cities. The landscape was filled with mountains and thick forests. It was quiet, isolated, perfect for a first strike. The Gyra fleet deployed its forces, and the ground troops marched toward Earth's surface. They had sensors to detect any signs of life, but the readings they were getting were strange. Earth's atmosphere was rich with life, yes, but there was something off about it. Some kind of energy seemed to pulse beneath the surface, almost like an echo of power. But there were no signals, no advanced technology to explain it. Just the wild terrain and the occasional animal scurrying about. Xaler, however, remained undeterred. His troops had landed without resistance, and they had quickly begun to set up a perimeter. Earth's inhabitants were nowhere to be seen. Everything was eerily still. "What do you make of this, General?" Xaler asked, turning to his second-in-command, General Vela. She was a seasoned officer, and her opinion mattered to him. Vela looked out at the landscape, squinting into the distance. "Sir, it's strange. There should be signs of life, even if they're primitive. But it's almost as if this place has been abandoned." "Abandoned?" Xaler asked, raising an eyebrow. "You believe they knew we were coming?" "I don't know, Commander," she replied, her voice filled with uncertainty. "There are signs of human activity in certain areas, but they seem scattered, disorganized." Xaler grunted. It didn't matter. The Gyra didn't need the cooperation of primitive species. They would take control regardless. He ordered the troops to proceed. As the ground forces advanced, something strange began to happen. The farther they moved into the wilderness, the more they discovered. At first it was just small things, odd symbols carved into the trees, strange markings on rocks, as though some ancient people had lived here long ago. But as they ventured deeper, they stumbled upon something far more alarming. The troops uncovered the first ruins. They were half buried in the earth, ancient structures that seemed to have been abandoned for millennia. The architecture was unlike anything the Gyra had seen before. These were not the crude structures of a primitive race. The walls were smooth, the designs intricate, and the technology embedded in the ruins seemed advanced, though decayed with age. Xaler stood at the edge of the ruins, staring at the crumbled stone and strange metalwork. His mind raced. What was this? How could humans, a race that had just begun to explore space, have built such complex structures? "Sir, these ruins," Vela spoke hesitantly, breaking the silence. "They don't look like anything human." Zelor turned to her. "I know. These aren't the works of the humans we've seen in our studies. These are something else." He took a step forward, examining the ruins more closely. There were strange markings on the walls, symbols that seemed familiar, but Zelor couldn't place them. As his fingers traced the surface of one of the stone carvings, the ground beneath them trembled. For a moment, the entire area seemed to vibrate, as if something deep within the earth had awoken. "What was that?" one of the soldiers asked, his voice tinged with panic. Zelor held up a hand to silence them. The rumbling subsided quickly, and the ground returned to its usual stillness. But the sensation lingered. Something wasn't right. "We're not alone," Zelor muttered to himself. The sense of unease deepened. He turned to Vela. "Send out a team to scan the surrounding area. We need to know what's below us." Vela nodded and relayed the orders to her subordinates. Soon, a team of Gyra soldiers armed with advanced scanning equipment began their investigation of the site. They worked quickly, and the results came back faster than expected. "Commander," one of the soldiers said, his voice shaking, "you need to see this." Zelor approached the soldier, his curiosity piqued. The soldier handed him a small device displaying the results of the scan. Zelor's eyes widened as he looked at the readout. Below the ruins, there was a vast, hidden complex. The energy readings were off the charts, far more powerful than anything they had ever encountered. Could this be another Gyra outpost? Vela asked, her voice low. Zelor shook his head. "No, this doesn't belong to any known race. This is something else." His mind raced. What had they discovered? The power beneath them was ancient, hidden, and incredibly potent. Whatever was buried under Earth's surface had been dormant for eons, but it was waking up now, and it seemed to have a purpose. Zelor stood up straight, his resolve hardening. "We need to get to the source of this power. Whatever it is, it's important." As he spoke, another rumble shook the ground. This time, it was stronger. The earth cracked open in front of them, revealing a dark, glowing doorway hidden beneath the ancient ruins. Zelor's heart raced. The secrets of Earth were no longer hidden. The alien force was about to learn that Earth wasn't the weak, unimportant world they had expected. The story ends here, leaving the audience hanging on what's to come. The aliens are about to uncover something far more dangerous than they anticipated, and they've just stepped into a mystery that could change the galaxy forever. This narrative sets the stage for the rest of the story. The hook is strong, focusing on the discovery of Earth's hidden secrets and the strange, mysterious power that's been hidden beneath the surface. It leaves the audience with plenty of questions and curiosity, ensuring they'll want to keep watching to find out what happens next. The rumble of the ground continued, shaking the earth beneath the alien invaders. It felt as though something ancient, something enormous, was stirring beneath them. The Gyra soldiers shifted uneasily, weapons raised, their eyes darting in all directions, as the atmosphere around them grew tense with anticipation. Zelor stood at the edge of the newly revealed opening, his gaze locked on the glowing doorway. The crack in the earth seemed to pulse with a strange rhythmic energy. It was as if the doorway itself was alive, breathing, and the power emanating from within was unlike anything Zelor had ever felt. The soldiers behind him murmured in confusion, their scanners whirring, desperately trying to make sense of the readings. But the data was chaotic, too erratic to be interpreted. One thing was clear, though. There was an immense force buried deep beneath the surface, and it was no longer dormant. "We need to move forward," Zelor said, his voice steady despite the unease building in his chest. "This could be the key to everything. Let's find out what's hidden down there." General Vela stepped forward, her gaze narrowing on the glowing entrance. "Are we sure this is wise?" "Commander, we don't know what's down there. What if it's a trap?" Zelor hesitated for a moment, considering her words. He had seen traps before, complex, devious, designed to crush enemies. But this felt different. This wasn't a simple ambush. There was something ancient about the energy, something that resonated with a power beyond the Gyra's understanding. "We've come too far to turn back now," Sailor replied. "Whatever is in there, we'll deal with it. We need to unlock Earth's secrets." With that, he stepped forward, the ground beneath him creaking and groaning as if in protest. Slowly, the other soldiers followed, their boots sinking slightly into the earth as they made their way to the edge of the mysterious opening. The glow from the doorway intensified, bathing the area in an eerie, otherworldly light. It was unlike any artificial light the Gyra had seen before. It wasn't cold or mechanical. It was warm, almost alive, pulsing like the heartbeat of the planet itself. Zeller motioned for the soldiers to spread out, forming a perimeter around the opening. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he wasn't about to let his guard down. He wasn't foolish enough to ignore the strange energy at work. Something was awakening, and he needed to be prepared for whatever came next. As the group advanced, the earth seemed to shift beneath them once more. The light grew brighter, the hum louder, vibrating through their very bones. It was as though the planet itself was reacting to their presence, acknowledging their intrusion. The feeling was intense, foreign, and unnerving. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed from the depths below. The sound was deep and resonant, like a warning or a command. And then, without warning, the ground cracked open further, revealing a staircase made of smooth alien metal. It spiraled down into the darkness, a seemingly endless descent into the unknown. Zayler motioned for the team to follow. "Stay alert," he commanded, his voice steady, though his instincts were on high alert. "We don't know what we're walking into." The Gyra soldiers descended cautiously, their weapons raised, their eyes scanning every shadow. The staircase seemed to stretch far deeper into the earth than they could have imagined, winding down into the heart of the planet. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the energy became. It felt like a weight pressing down on their shoulders, an invisible force pushing them ever downward. At the bottom of the stairs, the tunnel widened into a large cavern. The walls were lined with ancient inscriptions, carvings that seemed to tell a story, but one no one could understand. The language was old, lost to time, but the symbols were strangely familiar. They resembled the markings found on the ruins above ground, the ones that had sparked Sailor's initial curiosity. As they ventured further into the cavern, they saw something that made their blood run cold. A massive structure stood in the center of the cavern, its form unlike anything they had ever seen. It was a colossal, ancient machine, its metal surface covered in intricate designs that glowed faintly with the same strange energy that had been emanating from the opening. The machine seemed to hum with life, a low vibration that echoed through the air. Zaylor stepped forward, his mind racing. This was it, the source of the power beneath Earth. But what was it? What had they discovered? His fingers brushed against the surface of the machine, and a sudden surge of energy shot through him. He staggered back, startled, as the room seemed to come alive. The ground trembled, the air crackled with static, and the machine began to stir. A low, mechanical whirring sound filled the cavern as the ancient structure seemed to awaken from its long slumber. The Gyra soldiers stepped back, their eyes wide with fear. But Sailor didn't move. He was too fascinated by what was happening. This was beyond anything he had ever encountered. This was a discovery unlike any other. And then the machine spoke. A voice boomed through the cavern, deep and resonant, but not in any language the Gyra had ever heard. The words were a series of harsh sounds, like the thunderous rumblings of a storm. The voice was powerful, ancient, and filled with a strange sense of authority. Zaylor's heart raced. He had no idea what the voice meant, but one thing was certain. Whatever this was, it was not a mere relic of a lost civilization. This was something far more dangerous. The voice echoed again, louder this time, as if demanding attention. Before Zaylor could speak, the machine emitted a bright flash of light, and the ground shook violently beneath them. The Gyra soldiers stumbled, struggling to keep their balance as the cavern seemed to shift and warp around them. The walls cracked open, revealing hidden passages that led deeper into the planet. Zeller knew they had to act fast. They were no longer in control. The very fabric of the planet seemed to be responding to their presence, and it was clear that something immense was about to unfold. "Get ready for anything," Zeller said, his voice tight with urgency. "We're not alone here." As the tremors continued, the machine's hum grew louder, and the strange voice began to chant, its words now resonating with a terrifying power. Zeller knew the galaxy was about to change, and humanity, the very species they had come to conquer, was at the center of it all. This was just the beginning. The Gyra had unlocked something far beyond their understanding, and now they would face consequences that would forever change their fate. The stakes had never been higher, and the mystery of Earth's hidden legacy was only beginning to unravel. The cavern vibrated with an intensity that shook the Gyra to their core. The lights from the massive machine flickered and pulsed, casting strange shadows that danced across the walls. Zeller's heart pounded in his chest as the tremors continued to shake the very ground beneath their feet. The voice from the machine resonated once again, this time louder and clearer. The deep, echoing tones seemed to reverberate throughout the cavern, each word carrying an ancient weight that chilled their bones. It was like a warning, a challenge. Whatever force had created this machine, whatever intelligence lay behind it, was not something they could easily understand. "Get back," Zeller shouted, instinctively pushing his soldiers away from the center of the cavern. The ground beneath them seemed to shift once more, as if the entire structure was alive and reacting to their presence. But no one moved. The Gyra soldiers stood frozen, their eyes wide with awe and fear. The strange machine before them was no longer just an artifact. It was waking up, stirring with an unimaginable power that seemed to seep into the very air they breathed. And for the first time since they'd landed on Earth, Zeller felt uncertainty creeping into his mind. What had they uncovered? The flashing lights from the machine grew more intense, their glow blinding in its brilliance. Then suddenly, the entire structure shuddered with a deafening roar, as if it was struggling to awaken from an ancient slumber. Zeller's breath caught in his throat. The voice, now almost a chant, filled the air with an unearthly resonance. It was not speaking a language, not in the way the Gyra knew language, but rather in a series of deep primal sounds, pulses of energy that sent vibrations through every molecule of his body. Yet there was something familiar in the tone. It felt like it was speaking to something deep inside him, something forgotten. Then, as if to confirm his suspicions, the lights blinked once, then twice. The machine's hum changed, transitioning into something more precise, almost mechanical, as though it was beginning to process its surroundings. And that was when they realized it. This wasn't some ancient artifact. This was something far more advanced. It was a weapon. Zeller quickly turned to his soldiers, his voice commanding, "Prepare yourselves. This is no relic. We're dealing with something much more dangerous." The ground beneath them began to rumble again, but this time it wasn't the cavern itself shaking. This was different. This was a deliberate force. Zeller's eyes darted to the machine, the heart of the disturbance. The structure now seemed to be reacting to their proximity, its massive components shifting and realigning with a speed that was almost unfathomable. "Commander, look," one of the soldiers called out, pointing to the walls of the cavern. Zeller's eyes followed the direction of the soldier's outstretched arm. What he saw made his blood run cold. The walls, once solid, once ancient, were now moving. Cracks appeared where there had been none, and in the depths of the newly formed gaps, Zeller could see light. Bright, radiant light spilling from within. It was like the walls themselves were opening to reveal something beyond comprehension, something that had been hidden for millennia. A deep metallic grinding noise filled the cavern as the machine's enormous arms began to extend, reaching out into the now visible light. The air grew thick with energy, and Zeller could feel the power pulsing in waves, pressing in on him from all sides. It was intoxicating, overwhelming. And, if he was being honest, it was terrifying. Xelor turned to his second-in-command, General Vela. "We need to move. Now." But Vela was already moving forward, her eyes locked onto the machine. The others followed her lead, their steps hesitant but driven by a shared need to understand what had just awakened. The soldiers crept closer to the now exposed interior of the cavern, and as they did, something remarkable began to happen. The light grew brighter, blinding in its intensity, but at the same time, the air around them seemed to grow cooler. It was as though the planet was reacting to the awakening of the machine. Zeller's instincts told him to stop, to retreat before it was too late, but his curiosity, his hunger for answers, pushed him forward. "Wait," Zeller said, raising a hand. He motioned for the soldiers to hold their positions. "Something is changing. Be ready." A low hum began to emanate from the machine, growing in pitch and power. Zeller felt his pulse quicken. He knew the moment they crossed this line, they would be too deep to turn back. The machine wasn't just a weapon, it was a key, and the forces behind it had been waiting for this moment. And then it happened. Without any warning, the machine opened its eyes. At least, that's what it appeared to do. The massive lenses on the machine's surface lit up, glowing with a fierce intensity that sent waves of energy through the cavern. It was no longer just a piece of ancient technology. It was something more. A living thing, or at least something that acted like one. The voice, which had once been distant, reverberated through the chamber again. But this time, Zeller could feel it more deeply. It wasn't just in his ears, it was in his mind, thrumming through every fiber of his being. "Who dares to disturb the earth's sanctum?" The voice boomed, the words cutting through the air like a thunderclap. Zeller's heart skipped a beat. The voice was not the voice of a machine. It was the voice of an entity, an intelligence far older than the Gyra or any species they knew of, and it was angry. Zeller took a step back, his hands raised defensively, but it was clear this was not a force he could easily reason with. The voice spoke again, louder this time, as the very walls of the cavern seemed to tremble. "Leave, now, or face the consequences." The soldiers were frozen, unsure of what to do. The fear was palpable, and yet Zeller could feel the weight of something more pressing. They had made a terrible mistake. "This is no ordinary world," Zeller whispered to himself, "and we are in no position to challenge it." But it was too late. The lights from the machine flashed again, and the ground beneath them cracked wide open. Zeller and his soldiers barely managed to hold onto their footing as the world seemed to split apart before their eyes. The real war had begun, and the Gyra had just crossed a line they could never return from. The Gyra soldiers stood frozen, their minds reeling from the chaos unfolding around them. The ground had cracked open beneath their feet, and the hum of the machine intensified, now vibrating the very air. Zeller's heart raced as he felt an overwhelming wave of energy pulse from the core of the machine. It was not just power, it was something ancient, something primal, and it was now fully awake. The cavern itself seemed alive, as though the earth was responding to the ancient awakening. The walls, once solid and immovable, now shifted and groaned as if they were breathing. Each crack that spread through the rock exposed more of the machine, its shape becoming clearer, more defined. It was no longer just a structure. It was something vast, something beyond comprehension. "Commander, we need to leave." General Vela's voice trembled as she spoke, her eyes wide with fear. She had always been strong, unyielding in the face of danger, but even she could feel the weight of this place. Zeller didn't respond right away. His mind raced. The voice that had echoed through the cavern, the energy, the sheer power of the machine. It all pointed to one undeniable truth. This was no ordinary world. Earth wasn't just a new planet. It had been hidden for a reason. But before Zeller could give any orders, the machine began to move. Massive gears shifted, and great panels of metal slid open, revealing what seemed like a cockpit of sorts. The inside was dark, but faint glowing symbols pulsed along the edges of the walls, as though inviting them inside. The machine's hum grew louder, now mixing with a deep, resonant growl. It was as if the machine itself was calling to them, daring them to enter. "We can't leave," Zaylor said, more to himself than to his soldiers. He couldn't explain it, but something inside him told him they were meant to stay, to witness what was coming. "Are you insane, Commander?" Vela snapped, grabbing his arm. "We've already awoken something we can't control. If we don't leave now." But before she could finish, a sudden tremor shook the ground once more. The cavern seemed to expand, the walls falling away as though they were being peeled back by an unseen hand. The light grew brighter and sharper, and Zaylor could hear the deep, resonant sound of someone, speaking. It was not in any language he recognized. It wasn't even a language that seemed to belong to any known species. It was a vibration that ran through his chest, deep and unrelenting. And yet, the message was clear. "You should not have come. You should not have awakened me." The voice was both terrifying and commanding, and it sent a chill down Zaylor's spine. His soldiers, too, were visibly shaken, unsure of what to do next. "Get ready," Zaylor barked, taking a defensive stance. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew they had no choice now. They had disturbed something far beyond their understanding. They had crossed into territory no one had ever dared to explore. The machine shifted again. This time, its massive form began to rise, as though it were taking its first steps after millennia of dormancy. The air became thick with energy, and the Gyra could feel it, the pressure building around them. It was as if the entire planet was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. The soldiers raised their weapons, but Zaylor motioned for them to hold. This wasn't a battle they could win with mere firepower. This was something else, something more. "I don't care what we face," Zaylor said, his voice hard as steel. "We are not leaving until we understand what we've unleashed. Humanity's legacy is not just history, it is a force." As if to emphasize his words, the walls of the cavern suddenly exploded in a cascade of rocks. From within the now open expanse, a bright light shot up into the sky, far beyond the reaches of the cavern. The beam of light illuminated the night sky, shining across the landscape of Earth, as if calling out to the stars. The soldiers gasped, their mouths agape as they watched the light grow stronger, more intense. It was as though the Earth itself had come alive. It wasn't just responding to the Gyra's presence, it was fighting back. Zaylor stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing with questions. What was this place? What had they awakened? The energy coming from the machine was unlike anything he had ever felt. It wasn't just power, it was a warning, a challenge. The machine wasn't just ancient, it was the key to something much larger, something far more dangerous. And then the voice spoke again, louder than before, vibrating through their very souls. "The Earth has been awakened, and with it, the true war begins." The ground rumbled beneath them, and Zaylor felt the weight of the words settle heavily in his chest. The Gyra had made a grave mistake. They hadn't just discovered a new world, they had uncovered something much older, much more dangerous. This was no longer about conquering Earth. The real war was just beginning. The blinding beam of light that had erupted from the machine grew stronger with each passing second, lighting up the entire sky. Even from their position in the cavern, Zaylor and his soldiers could feel its power, an overwhelming force that seemed to pulse with the very heartbeat of the planet. The ground shook beneath their feet, and the air itself hummed with energy. It was as if the Earth was alive, alive in a way that no one had ever imagined. Zaylor's mind raced. He had always known that the galaxy was filled with wonders beyond his understanding. But this was beyond anything he'd ever encountered. The ancient machine that they had uncovered was no ordinary relic. It was a beacon, a harbinger of something much bigger, something far older. And it had been lying dormant beneath Earth's surface, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. "What is happening?" General Vela's voice trembled as she stepped closer to Xalar, her eyes wide with fear. She had been with him through countless battles, had seen horrors that would break most soldiers, but this was different. This was something they could not fight. "I don't know," Xalar replied, his gaze fixed on the swirling light. "But we need to understand it. This is Earth's legacy. This is what we've come for." The rest of the Gyra soldiers stood in stunned silence, their weapons lowered, their faces pale. They were soldiers, hardened by war and battle. But this was something entirely different. It was as though the planet itself had risen up to challenge them. As though humanity's forgotten past had come back to reclaim its place in the galaxy. And then, as suddenly as the light had appeared, it vanished. The silence that followed was deafening. The glowing symbols on the walls of the machine flickered and dimmed, leaving the cavern in a strange, eerie calm. The hum of energy that had filled the air was gone, replaced by a deep, unsettling stillness. Zeller's heart raced in his chest as he scanned the now quiet cavern. What had just happened? Had they awakened the Earth's defenses, or was this just the calm before the storm? "Commander," Vela said, her voice barely above a whisper, "what should we do?" Zeller didn't answer right away. His mind was too consumed with the enormity of what they had just witnessed. He had thought they were exploring a simple world, an untouched planet ripe for conquest. But now it was clear that Earth was far from simple. It was a living, breathing entity with a history that spanned eons, far older than any of the Gyra had known. "We wait," Zeller finally said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his mind. "Whatever comes next, we must be prepared. This machine, it's not just technology. It's a message. We've awoken something, and now we need to understand it." Just as he finished speaking, the ground trembled again. But this time, the tremor was different. It wasn't the usual shaking from the Earth's shifting crust. No, this was something more deliberate, more controlled. The machine at the center of the cavern began to stir once more, its massive form vibrating as it powered up again. Then, with a deep mechanical groan, the machine began to rise from the Earth. Massive arms of metal and steel emerged from beneath the surface, pushing aside tons of rock and debris. The Gyra soldiers stepped back, their eyes wide with a mix of awe and fear. The machine was coming to life, its purpose now clear. But it was not the machine alone that was rising. As the machine fully emerged from the ground, a second structure appeared behind it, hidden deep within the Earth. This new structure was colossal, far larger than the machine itself. It was covered in ancient runes and symbols, the same glowing symbols that had pulsed with energy just moments ago. It was as if the entire cavern had been a shield, a protective casing for this ancient structure that had remained hidden for centuries. The Gyra soldiers were speechless. This wasn't just a machine. It was a temple, a monument, and it was clear now that it had been built to protect something, a legacy that humanity had left behind, a legacy the Gyra had unknowingly disturbed. Zeller's pulse quickened. They had stumbled upon something far greater than they had realized. The Earth was not simply a planet to be conquered. It was the cradle of a power so ancient that even the stars themselves might tremble before it. The voice echoed again, this time louder, as if it were coming from the very core of the machine. "You have awoken what was meant to remain asleep. And now, the true test begins." The soldiers flinched at the voice's power. It wasn't a voice of warning. It was a voice of challenge. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet began to shift. Massive tendrils of energy shot up from the ground, wrapping around the soldiers like invisible chains. The energy wasn't physical, but its grip was real. The soldiers tried to move, but they were frozen in place, their weapons powerless against the force that held them. Zeller struggled to break free from the invisible grip, but it was futile. The energy was too strong. He looked around at his soldiers, who were equally immobilized. His mind raced. What was happening? Why were they being held like this? Then the voice spoke once more, this time with a sense of finality. "You have disturbed the balance. You have awakened the legacy of humanity, and now you will bear witness to its true power." The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Zeller's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the truth of the situation. They weren't just witnessing a forgotten history. They were standing on the precipice of something much larger, much more dangerous. This was the beginning of a war, not just with Earth, but with the legacy of humanity itself. The Gyra had thought they were the invaders, the conquerors, but now they were the ones who had awakened something far beyond their control. And as the energy continued to pulse around them, Zeller understood one thing with absolute certainty: the real battle had just begun. The intense energy pulsating around the soldiers slowly began to dissipate, but the air remained thick with tension. Zeller's heart pounded in his chest as he struggled against the force that held him. But no matter how much he tried to move, he couldn't break free. It felt like the Earth itself was watching them, weighing their every action, as if it had been waiting for centuries for this very moment to arrive. The ground shook once again, but this time, it wasn't just the machine that stirred. It was the entire planet. Zeller looked up, his eyes widening as the colossal structure behind the machine began to open. Massive metallic doors slid apart with a resounding sound, revealing a dark, cavernous interior. Inside, glowing energy fields pulsed with an intensity that seemed to resonate with the very core of the Earth. Then, from the darkness within the structure, they saw them. Figures emerged, silhouettes at first, but as they stepped into the light, their true form became clear. They were humans, but not like any humans the Gyra had encountered. These were not the fragile, defenseless beings they had assumed Earth's inhabitants to be. No, these humans were different. Their bodies were cloaked in ancient, but highly advanced armor, their eyes glowing with a strange, otherworldly light. Zeller's mind reeled. Who were these humans? How had they survived this long without anyone knowing? The Gyra had always believed that humanity was weak, primitive even, but these beings, these warriors, were anything but weak. They radiated an aura of power and ancient knowledge, their presence commanding respect. The lead figure stepped forward, the energy surrounding them crackling like static. Their voice was deep and resonant, echoing across the cavern. "You have trespassed, Gyra. You have disturbed the balance of our world. For this, you will answer." Zeller's breath caught in his throat. The voice, there was a strength to it that he had never encountered. It was not a threat, but a promise, one that carried with it centuries of power. The Gyra had faced countless foes throughout their expansion, but never had they encountered anything like this. The human warrior's eyes locked onto Zeller's, and for a moment, he felt as though they were staring straight into his soul. The feeling was unnerving, like this human could see every secret, every thought hidden deep within him. "You seek to conquer Earth, but Earth has never been unguarded," the warrior continued, their voice colder now. "This planet is not what you think it is. It is the cradle of something far more ancient than your race will ever comprehend. We are the guardians, the last of a forgotten legacy, and you have just awakened the war that will decide your fate." The words hit Zeller like a physical blow. The Gyra had always prided themselves on being the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. They had conquered countless worlds, crushed entire species beneath their might. But now they were facing something they could not understand. This was not just about strength or technology. It was about something far deeper, something primal. Zeller tried to speak, to defend his mission, but no words came. He could feel the weight of the warrior's gaze pressing on him, suffocating him, as if the very air itself had turned against him. "You are not the first to come seeking Earth's power," the warrior said, their voice filled with a quiet menace. "And you will not be the last. But you will be the first to face the consequences of your actions." As the words echoed in the cavern, the ground trembled again. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just the machine or the strange warriors moving. It was something much larger, something even more terrifying. Zeller turned to see massive shapes emerging from the depths of the Earth, their outlines barely visible in the dim light. They were colossal, massive creatures that seemed to be made of both stone and metal, their eyes glowing with the same eerie light as the human warriors. "These are the defenders of Earth," the warrior said, gesturing to the creatures. "They have slept for millennia, but they will rise to protect their world. And you, Gyra, will be their first test." Zalor's heart raced. He had underestimated Earth in every possible way. He had assumed that humanity was weak, that their planet was just another resource to be exploited. But now he realized how wrong he was. Earth was far more than just a world. It was a living, breathing entity with a history that stretched back long before the Gyra even existed. The massive creatures began to move, their steps slow but deliberate, shaking the ground with each heavy footfall. They were unlike anything Zalor had ever seen. Their forms were massive and intimidating, resembling a mix of ancient beasts and technological marvels, their bodies covered in ancient armor-like plating that seemed to glow with an inner light. The warriors that stood beside them were no less impressive, their advanced armor shimmering with energy, weapons at the ready. Zalor knew that if these creatures, or the humans, decided to fight, there would be no way for the Gyra to win. His forces were strong, but nothing could withstand the combined might of a world that had been waiting for this moment for eons. Suddenly, Zalor's mind shifted. He had always been a conqueror, a leader of armies, but now he was facing something beyond his comprehension. The humans, the defenders, they were not just protecting their world. They were protecting a legacy far older and more powerful than the Gyra's technological prowess. The voice of the human warrior spoke again, this time with a finality that left no room for negotiation. "You are not here to claim Earth's power. You are here to answer for your trespass. Prepare yourselves, Gyra. The war you saw has now come to you." With that, the ground shook violently, and the towering figures of the defenders surged forward, their movements like a tidal wave of unstoppable force. The battle for Earth had begun, and the Gyra would soon learn just how outmatched they truly were. The Gyra forces began to retreat, but it was clear that no matter how far they ran, they couldn't escape the relentless power of Earth's defenders. The towering stone-metal creatures moved with terrifying precision, their every step shaking the ground as they advanced. The human warriors, once only a mystery, now stood as living symbols of Earth's ancient power. Zalor could feel the weight of their presence, and it was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The confidence of the Gyra, once so unshakable, had vanished. The battle had only just begun, but Zalor's mind raced with one undeniable truth: the Gyra were outmatched. Zalor struggled to make sense of what was unfolding before him. His fleet, which had once been the pride of the Gyra Empire, seemed insignificant in the face of the titanic beings now guarding Earth. These creatures, these warriors, were not just defenders. They were the very embodiment of Earth's wrath, born from the planet's ancient legacy. Zalor had only come to plunder Earth's resources, never imagining that it would awaken to defend itself so fiercely. The massive figures continued their march, each movement a calculated advance, pushing the Gyra back. It wasn't just their physical might. It was the aura they exuded, the ancient power of the planet itself. The energy emanating from them was almost tangible, a force that made the Gyra feel as though their very existence was being judged. The human warrior who had spoken to them before stepped forward once more, his presence commanding, his voice booming over the chaos. "Your greed has brought you to this point," he said, his words cutting through the air like a sword. "You have trespassed on sacred ground. You have disturbed a power that has slumbered for eons. Now you will learn what happens when humanity's past is awakened." Zalor's heart raced as he realized the full weight of the situation. The Gyra had never faced a force like this, an entire world that had been waiting for its defenders to rise. Earth was not just another planet to conquer. It was a living entity with its own ancient guardians, and the humans who had long inhabited it were not the weak, primitive beings the Gyra had believed them to be. The ground trembled beneath Sailor's feet as the defenders surged forward, their massive forms moving with incredible speed. They were like unstoppable titans, and with every step, they decimated the gyra forces. Energy beams shot from their weapons, cutting through the gyra ships as though they were made of paper. The gyra tried to retaliate, but it was clear they were outmatched. No amount of firepower could stop the relentless onslaught of Earth's protectors. Sailor felt a surge of panic. He had to do something, anything, to turn the tide of this battle. But as he looked around, he saw his fleet in disarray. The once mighty armada was now just a collection of broken ships, their crews scrambling to escape the fury of Earth's defenders. The situation was slipping further and further from his control. Then, in the distance, Sailor saw something that made his blood run cold. A massive structure, towering above the battlefield, began to stir. It was as though the very planet itself had been awakened to join the fight. The ground cracked open, and from the depths, an enormous ship began to rise, its massive hull gleaming with energy. It was the heart of Earth's power, a warship that had remained hidden for millennia. Sailor's eyes widened in shock. The gyra had always believed that they were the most advanced civilization in the galaxy, but now they were learning a terrifying truth. Earth had been hiding its own arsenal of unimaginable power, and this ship was the key to unlocking it. The ship's massive weapon systems began to power it up, its guns aimed directly at the remaining gyra forces. The human warrior turned to Sailor, his eyes filled with determination. "This is the power of humanity's legacy," he said, "and it will be the last thing you see before the end of your empire." The ground shook with an explosive force as the warship fired, and the first gyra ships were obliterated in an instant. Sailor watched in horror as the remaining fleet scattered in a desperate attempt to survive. But it was too late. The power of Earth's hidden weapon was too great. The gyra had come to conquer, but they were the ones who would be conquered. As the warship unleashed wave after wave of destruction, Sailor knew there was no escaping this. The gyra were no longer the hunters. They were the prey. Earth's ancient legacy had awakened, and it would not rest until every last gyra had been driven from its soil. The battle for Earth was not just about survival. It was about a reckoning for every invasion, every conquest the gyra had ever carried out. The gyra fleet continued to crumble under the onslaught, and Sailor was left with nothing but the bitter realization that Earth had never been a world they could conquer. It had been waiting for this moment, waiting for its warriors to rise. And now, the galaxy would witness the power of humanity's past, and the destruction of those who dared to challenge it. In the distance, as the warship fired its final salvo, Sailor saw the light of his fleet's last remaining ships flicker out. The gyra had been defeated, and Earth had proven itself to be far more than a simple world. It was a force of nature, one that even the might of the gyra could not overcome. And as Sailor stood amidst the wreckage of his forces, he realized that the true war had just begun. Earth was no longer just a planet to conquer. It was a symbol of resistance, a symbol of a humanity that would not be crushed. And as he faced the remnants of the once great gyra empire, Sailor understood that he had witnessed the rise of something far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined: the unbreakable spirit of Earth's defenders.